I mean, bows are cool and all, but what's with those, like, arrow things? They look so piddly and pointless. I mean, I would prefer to shoot maybe, like, magical arrows. Maybe, like, a lot of magical arrows. Maybe a lot of magical arrows. Okay, yep, that's the one. Ladies, gentlemen, and magic archers of all ages, Dragons Dogma is at its best when you really delve deeply into each of its various aspects, and one of the biggest, of course, being the vocations. One of my personal favorites of those in Dragons Dogma 2 being the Magick Archer. This is the vocation that unlocks the latest, aside from Warfare, technically, and while it isn't technically new in this game, it is the only one of the old hybrid vocations from the first game that survived and came through to the sequel, ready for a bit of a redux. So today we're going to talk everything about Magick Archer and how to really get the most out of it, the best skills for the best situations, and a couple sets of 4 of them for your general gameplay loadouts. First things first though, just for completion's sake, to actually unlock Magick Archer you need to go to the southern tip of Batal to Drabnir's Grotto, a long cave system. Head through and exit the other side to find yourself on the volcanic island, and a short walk down from the main road you will find this dwarf in pain. Give him 3 herbs of any kind from your pack, and he will thank you and invite you back to his house just over the ridge. Head to the house and talk to him to offer to walk him to the hot springs. Then it is just a straightforward escort mission from there, though he is a little bit slow due to his back pain, but you can also carry him in between enemies if you want to speed it up a little bit. It just will drain stamina quite a bit. Once you arrive at the hot springs though, the escort will end and the dwarf's wife will come out from around the corner and thank you, offering you the knowledge of Magick Archer, and if you talk to her again afterwards, she will give you the legendary technique as well, which gives you a skill called Martyr's Bolt, which we will absolutely be talking about in a moment. First though, let's talk about your equipment, because no matter what you are doing with the vocation itself, the set of gear that you will want is going to be the same. There is no way that I know of to get it from a place that isn't a vendor, but the vendor at the Volcano Island camp over here sells Dragon's Breath, which is the best Magick Archer weapon in the game, at least before Endgame or New Game Plus, and they also sell the best helmet, Confidant's Hood. I don't personally wear this just because I'd like seeing my character's face, but it is the best helmet. There's also the best armor, the Aeonian coat, and best legs too in the Mercenary Hosen, with an extremely high defense and magic defense stat, but also 5 slash and strike resistance on top of that. That said, there are some alternative armors in Batal that are pretty decently statted too, if you would prefer to favor aesthetic over potency just a little bit on the defensive side at least. With that then, let's talk about the various core skills for the weapon and the way that it will work regardless of your choices. Light attack is a sort of auto fire of a couple of magic arrows that shoot to the closest target. They're really not potent at all, they don't do much damage, so you just won't use this often. The only situations that I do is to get a flinch if I want to pick someone up and throw them at close range instead of actually killing them with the arrows themselves. Your heavy attack changes you back and forth between pinpoint volley and rivet shot, and your core skill button will initiate either pinpoint volley or rivet shot, whichever is selected. Rivet shot is shown by the wide circle on the screen. This targets a very spread out area, but also charges shots far slower. Pinpoint volley targets a smaller area, but can charge much faster. Both of these can target multiple spots on the same creature as well if they have multiple different parts to target, but the main difference between them is just precision required in aiming as well as charge speed. Generally speaking, I recommend playing pinpoint volley mode 90% of the time, if not more, with the only exception really being if there's a ton of enemies at close range, specifically at night, as nighttime makes it harder for your arrows to lock into enemies that are further away as you can't see them, and the main reason that pinpoint volley is best is because the best way to play this vocation is to just stay at range where pinpoint volley can target all the enemies in the fight anyways. Magick Archer is not made for close range, it's just a backliner for sure. For further effects to this, Climactic Arrow makes your shots do more damage if they are fired the moment that they finish charging, Scopic Sight extends the potential range of the lock-on passively, Tracker's Sight increases the number of lock-on targets, meaning the number of shots that you can fire per shot, and Protracting Arrow makes it so when you use an elemental skill of any type, it will then apply a short-term elemental boon to your weapon of the matching element type. With that then, let's talk about the weapon skills. As a general description, Magick Archer excels at 3 things: applying statuses to enemies, applying elemental damage to enemies, and supporting pawns. Frost Hunter Bolt gives you sort of a Yondu style arrow that flies around hitting the same target over and over for a number of seconds, just sort of locked onto the part that it is, piercing through and rounding back around. This is actually great for single target, it's pretty decent for AoE as well, if you can get the distance to target multiple enemies per use of it. A Radiant Orb gives you a big glob of fire that can stick to enemies or walls and will emit light, as well as slowly building up the burn status on enemies too. This one is very quickly overshadowed though. I would say there is some situational niche for it though, such as I mentioned earlier that it's hard to play at longer range at night because of targeting in the dark, but the skill creates light at a distance, which can solve that problem. So you could argue that it's used for any nighttime specific content you are engaging in, but I definitely wouldn't use it normally in any of the setups setups I'll be mentioning today. Then we have Ricochet Shot, upgraded into Ricochet Hunter. You charge this up, the longer that you charge, the more arrows it fires. Every arrow that you fire will then bounce off of any surface around you for a number of seconds before dissipating. In the right environment, this will absolutely shred any enemy it hits. In a cave, inside of buildings, in a hallway, this is your highest damage move by an absolute landslide. If you can trap an enemy surrounded by these, it is game over for them. However, that said, a lot of this game takes place in more open areas, and in those areas, it's pretty much sort of useless. So honestly, I would say take this if you specifically plan on going through caves or indoor areas with combat. Otherwise, it is unfortunately a bit hard to justify the slot regardless of just how badass the skill actually is. Then we have Sedative and Soporific Bolt. Charge this to release an arrow that pops a cloud of sleeping smoke. Longer charge increases the tick value of the sleep buildup, and you can stack these on top of each other to put nearly anything to sleep if you actually want to. This definitely has some value to it in a general setup. It won't help massively for most combat, but you could do something like Warfare with this skill in it, then like some big warrior smashes or something along those lines to take advantage of the wake up hit, but pawns would often interfere with that anyways. Regardless, this is definitely a niche skill, but it is a cool concept for sure. Then we have Flame Fang, which upgrades into Blaze Fang Arrow. This you charge for a short period of time, then release, and you actually control the arrow in flight once you do. It will explode in a fairly generous radius around the landing point, but also you can actually aim this and fly it for quite a while before it will manually just explode itself. This is one of your best consistent large group clearing options, honestly, and it pairs quite well with some other skills as well as activating a short-term fire affinity on your weapon for any enemies that happen to be weak to that element, which is, to be fair, a lot of enemies. This one I recommend for a lot of different situations, especially once you have your damage sorted out properly. You can essentially just use this to farm enemies that could be quite irritating otherwise by firing this from a long distance away and aiming it between large groups of them from a distance where they can't even tell that you exist yet, never actually putting any of your party in danger at all. After that, it is Hailstone and Arctic Bolt. I love this skill personally. It's basically just charge a shot that slowly builds a giant icicle. Then you shoot the giant icicle at your enemy. It has high single target damage, it has high knockdown power if you hit a weak spot for staggers on larger enemies too. It's just really good and fun to use as well. Generally speaking, I recommend using this if you expect to encounter any meteor enemies at all. The only reason you wouldn't is if you have pawns that can spam Augural Flare, as this doesn't combo well with that, as it is a singular large hit attack, but if you just want pure single target damage from you yourself, then this is your best skill for it for sure, outside of Martyr's Bolt, which we'll talk about soon. Generally, I'd say you can always make room for this in your setup, so you always have something strong if you come across a larger foe and you just need some general damage. Then we have Spark Chain and Bolt Chain Strike. Each arrow you fire with this ability creates an electric stake. If you hit an enemy with it, the stake will stick to them. If you hit the ground, it will stay in the spot that it hits on the ground. If the stakes get close to each other, they will shoot lightning towards one another, chaining this effect to further stakes as well. If enemies are hit by this effect, it will apply flinch and shock value and low lightning damage as well as that, but the important part is the shock and flinch. If you fill a pack of enemies with a bunch of different stakes from this skill, they just won't be able to move anymore at all. You could have 15 enemies trying to swarm you all at once, but if you get these set up first, then they will have no chance. It's genuinely very cool. Generally, this skill is the one that I switch back and forth with Frost Hunter Bolt. Frost Hunter Bolt is better for more single target focused combat. Bolt Chain is way better for group management, and of course, once you have the enemy shocked in a pile, you can always fire a Blaze Fang arrow into the middle of them for a large explosion too. Then we come to our next big skill, Sagittate Downpour, which upgrades into Sagittate Avalanche. This will fire more arrows the longer that you charge it, with the actual number that it can fire at max charge being actually somewhat ludicrous. This is the skill that you want to use if you are trying to synergize with a pawn that is using Augural Flare. If a flare gets placed on a monster part and then you fire a full volley of this skill into it, it will just absolutely implode. That said, this is actually still only the second best way to interact with Augural Flare as a Magick Archer, because the strongest is Martyr's Bolt, our legendary skill. While you are charging this, it will actively lower your health and give you loss gauge as well. The trick to this is to charge the minimum amount of time possible to use the least health for the situation that you're in, as it will target pretty much all of the enemies on screen of note instantly when you start using the ability. That said though, the longer that you hold it, the more damage it will do towards duration. So it is very much a massive risk-reward ability. You have to judge how long this fight could take and how much damage you could actually save by just giving some of your health for it. If you full charge your health bar into this, you can one-shot a full Drake with no help from anyone else if you're built the way that I am. Combine that with an Augural Flare though on top of that, and you can just imagine how ridiculously that would go too. This just creates an absolute shower of arrows, essentially working like the Frost Hunter Bolt, flinging back and forth through the targeted spots, and the only caveat for it really is that it obviously does eat into your maximum health to use it, so you can only use it a set number of times between rests. Well, at least sort of. Technically, you can drink an all heal elixir if you have a bunch of those to clear out the loss gauge, but of course those are pretty rare to have, so I wouldn't expect anyone to just have a stack of them, so I can't really recommend actually using them as a full playstyle. As well, it's worth noting that Warrior does have an augment that claims to reduce loss gauge accumulation when you take damage, and it actually does in most cases, but sadly it does not affect Martyr's Bolt, which drains the same amount regardless of whether you have the augment on or not. All that said, this is still an exceptionally good skill, but I would only really recommend taking it and using it on either particularly dangerous bosses or a minimum charge of it on a massive group of enemies to target them instantly. Essentially, within its niche, it is unbelievable, but it is still a very niche skill. Then we have all of our support skills. Recovery Arrow, if fully charged, can revive pawns at range, which is bonkers strong for overpowering enemies that are above your pay grade. If you can get them to focus on your pawns, maybe use a fighter pawn or a warrior pawn that has taunts, then you can just revive them whenever they go down from a distance safely. If you undercharge the ability, it will still heal allies that it hits as well. Vim Taking Arrow is a piercing line shot that does damage to all enemies that are hit by it, but also heals any pawns that are in the vicinity for an amount dependent on the damage done to enemies, which is quite cool for sure. Then we have Bartizan, which lets you fire a shield onto an ally, which blocks attacks but also counterattacks to deal damage to the enemy in relation to the attack that was blocked. In other words, it is insanely good for things like boss fights, sort of meh in smaller enemies. In any case, those are the skills that you have access to, so there are really just three main setups that I would recommend. Blazefang Arrow for long-range controllable AoE damage is fantastic to have pretty much all the time. Arctic Bolt for on-the-fly single target damage, but it also doubles up as a quick-fire guaranteed flinch. If you fire at a small enemy without charging it, they will get knocked back no matter what, which can help you get some space if they're too close to you. Then you have a bit more flexibility with your other skills, which is why I've got three setups. One skill will guaranteed be either single target or pack clear focus depending on what you're doing. For general traveling and pack clear, I recommend Bolt Chain Strike for the mass crowd control that it can give you. In caves or indoor situations instead, I would switch this over to Ricochet Hunter whenever possible to just absolutely shred enemies. For more pure single target situations, you want either Sagittate Avalanche if you expect a particularly long fight, or Martyr's Bolt for one that you can just glass cannon through with a really particularly strong shot. And you want to pair these with a sorcerer pawn that has augural flare, ideally anytime that you can. Worth mentioning, if you build your own Sorc pawn and give them only augural flare, if you use the Go command, then they will cast that spell if they are not otherwise engaged, so you can sort of manually guarantee to control it. Past that, you can choose to bring one support skill if you want. Shields are again great for larger boss type enemies. The ranged revive is good in almost all situations. Otherwise, if survival is proving no problem at all, I instead recommend Frost Hunter Bolt. It again can apply quite a lot of control, both in pack clearing and larger bosses by freezing them, and also count as a lot of small hits to combo with augural flare too. Then the third build option really is just full support. I'll probably go a bit deeper on this another day in more detail, but Magick Archer has the type of skills that you can use to just fully act as a support for your pawns in the party if you want to. And that is sort of one of the more beautiful things about this vocation. You have a number of healing options, you have a number of different support options, you can revive down pawns distance, you can apply shields that also apply counterattack damage. There's a lot of power in here supportively, but it is also combined with full access to a strong offensive kit too, so you can mix and match as much support as you want with that crazy offense. With that covered, then let's talk about our augments of choice here. From Magick Archer itself, you want Voracity. This gives you stamina when you kill a target. This is especially great as we use tons of stamina, and sometimes if you go overboard, you can end up in the exhausted state, stuck there either until you get some stamina food in you or get some help from a pawn. But if you kill an enemy with the shot that drained the stamina, it will give you some stamina back and cure the exhaustion state instantly, which is lovely from a single augment. Then we go for Zeal from Warfarer. Everyone's gonna want this really. It's stamina reduction on weapon skill use, and that is nuts. Sagacity from Sorcerer gives you bonus magic, which is straight up bonus damage. Exaltation from Mage increases stamina recovery speed, which is of course also helpful. And then we grab 2 from regular Archer. Endurance for increased maximum stamina just in general, and then Lethality for bonus damage when hitting an opponent in their weak spot. This weapon excels at targeting specific monster parts. Really, it locks onto them literally, so this bonus is extremely good for us. And that's pretty much the whole way to actually build the vocation in different ways. So let's just talk a little bit about actually playing it. For general farming, if you know where the enemies are ahead of you, you just want to launch off a Blazefang Arrow. If you wind up close range before realizing the enemies are there, instead use Spark Chain Strike to get some crowd control on the go and stop these enemies from overwhelming you by just shocking them on repeat. If you're indoors, use Ricochet Hunter literally always. It's just so unbelievably good. Then let's talk about boss combat. Really, it's quite simple. Use Arctic Bolt on weak spots until you get some kind of stagger. Order your pawn to use Augural Flare, use either Martyr's Bolt or Sagitted Avalanche on the targeted part, and then watch it explode. A lot of the time, even the icicle itself will do a bunch of damage, and if you're against a boss that happens to be weak to fire, you can shoot off Blazefang arrows for strong single target damage as well. Not to mention that Bolt Chain Strike will actually still work on bosses if you use it here. You You can stick stakes into multiple parts of a boss, and then they will just consistently get shocked a ton. It also does count as a load of hits per second for Augural Flare 2 if it gets applied while these stakes are active. All that said, Martyr's Bolt is so damn strong that if you go into a boss fight with a full health bar and decide the boss should just die instantly and you use the skill, if you give it a solid charge for most, if not all of your health bar, you will obliterate 90% of every enemy in the game in a single cast. It is genuinely that strong. It is ridiculous. Of course, it then makes you play on no health at all, but that's the trade-off, really. And that pretty much does it then, everyone. Just a full deep dive on the Magick Archer Vocation and how best to use it, really. The way that each ability works and how they can synergize together with each other, how you can build this up with equipment, and a little bit on how to work it with pawn lineups, or even how to build it as part of warfare. And then, of course, just some more general builds and then tips on how to play the Vocation as a whole. I hope you've enjoyed this, and hopefully it will help out any fellow Magick Archers out there, because this is genuinely just one of the coolest ways to play the game that exists, in my opinion. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.